Justin's Lighthouse Thursday night family group. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight, where we're going to show a slide presentation. But this is, and I promise it does kind of bog down with a lot of information, but we're just going to skip past that and just kind of keep it with a real easy overview so we don't put anybody to sleep. But it's interesting stuff, really, addiction in the brain. There's, it is dubbed as a brain disease. There's clearly stuff going on that's not to let the addict off the hook. It's the old expression that the addict is not responsible for their disease, but they are responsible for their behavior. If we have asthma and you know you have asthma and you've been prescribed certain protocols to treat your asthma and you don't follow that, then that's on you. It's the same thing with alcoholism and addiction. We know what to do. We're learning what to do, but everything is in the hands of the alcoholic. They have to do the work. It works if you work it. All these little cliches. But I'm going to start off reading this little thing, and then we'll get into this. This is about hope and faith. Regarding step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 2 is often referred to as the hope step. In coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, we will remember what it was like to live sanely and have the faith to hope that sanity can return. Faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. How can we be confident that something we want is going to happen, especially if all of our hopes have been dashed? How can we risk believing that the life we hope for is waiting for us around the bend? The Bible tells us that the key is in the nature of the higher power we look to. We are told that anyone who wants to come to Him must believe that God exists and that He rewards those who sincerely seek Him. If we see God as one who is reaching out to help us, we will be more eager to look for Him. If our faith has not matured to that point yet, we can ask for help. One man came to Jesus asking Him to help his young son who was afflicted by a demon, and he said, "Have mercy on us and help us, if you can." "What do you mean, if I can?" Jesus asked. "Anything is possible if a person believes." The father instantly cried out, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." We can start by asking God to help us with our faith, and then we can ask Him for the courage to hope for a better future. We've been talking a lot about spirituality this week, and that one really kind of fits in with that. Developing an understanding of our concept of God, as on an individual basis, and I hope you guys found that pretty interesting. Okay, so let's get into it. Tonight we're going to talk about addiction and your brain. What addiction does to the brain. Addiction impacts the brain on many levels. And I think one of the best terms I've ever heard is it literally hijacks the brain. Right? It just takes it over. And the brain craves the reward. It literally becomes beyond the person's ability to withstand or to resist. And so, like with anything, the more someone uses, the more they crave. And then eventually, over a period of time, the pathways in the brain begin to change. And this is why in early recovery, it's easy, especially for families. We want to look at it from a family perspective with so much rationality. Why can't you just snap out of it? Why can't you just, and we might even think of, previous periods in life where the alcoholic was doing so good and they were taking care of their things and they were hopeful and they were achieving things. Why can't you just be like that? What's wrong with you? And the answer is the brain has been changed. And so thoughts get restructured, the ability to reason is completely jacked, decision making, feelings, motor skills. With each use, and this little statistic comes out of a Harvard study, with each use, the brain is changed in over 1,000 ways. With each use. That, to me, is just unbelievable. But, of course, the description of addiction is, in spite of negative consequences, the addict or alcoholic will continue to use. A rational brain can bring to bear consequences. Say a regular person or maybe an alcohol user can go out one night, drink a little too much, wreck the truck, and wake up the next morning and say, wow, I got to make some changes in my life. The alcoholic goes out and does the same thing, wakes up the next morning and says, man, I got to take different routes next time I drink. I've got to drive a little faster. I've got to leave just a little bit earlier. I've got to try to have one less drink. The alcoholic isn't thinking, I need to change my behavior. The alcoholic is thinking, I need to figure out how to change my situation so I don't get caught or I don't have a consequence, which, of course, is unrealistic. Withdrawal can be very unpleasant. Of course, everybody in this room has either experienced it or witnessed it, probably multiple times. I kind of did these backwards. I wish I'd kind of done some more of the brain stuff before we got to this, but after a period of use, the brain has changed, the receptors are dry, the brain's not really functioning like it's supposed to, and that's what leads to these severe withdrawal symptoms. The brain will eventually begin to produce these chemicals again, but it takes time. And so in the early recovery, certainly the withdrawal phase, there's this emotional roller coaster. Depression is very common. Sweating, cognitive distortion. I'll be fine. There's also a lot of craving, because that's what's logged in the brain as in the memory part of the brain. Well, if I just use again, then I'll get relief. And that's one of the things, I think that might be one of the biggest things that keep people from even achieving an early recovery position, is just that overwhelming need for instant relief. And of course that need for instant gratification is so locked into the brain that it can make beginning recovery very difficult. A lot of irritability, convulsions can be a part of it, especially when you're talking about alcohol or benzodiazepines. Easily angered, our families certainly recognize that one, and that's not all of them, but that's a good gist of it all. Okay, here's something that is fairly new to researchers. I'm going to say the last 20 years or so. It actually takes 25 years for the brain to fully develop. And of course, drugs and alcohol interfere with that development. And we're going to get more into the adolescent phase as we move through this. So I'm going to kind of save a lot of my comments for that, but it'll sure make a lot of sense to you. If the most critical time during adolescence or during brain development is adolescence, that's also when most alcoholics and addicts begin experimenting. So even though there might not be a full-blown addiction in place, it's not unusual for a person to start drinking or experimenting with drinking or pot or whatever at the age of 12. Now, of course, in the last 15 years, the trend has been just, robbing your parents' prescription medication cabinet and getting into pills. And so obviously, if that's a critical developmental period for the brain, and now there's any disruption to that development, you're going to have problems. And so these faulty pathways in the brain begin to solidify with more use, setting up future addiction and dysfunction. So even though there may not be full-blown addiction, it's certainly setting it up because these pathways are changing already. The brain is obviously the most complex organ in the body. It regulates everything. The brain, the CEO of the body. And so it's shaping everything, shapes behavior, shapes the way we think and we feel, enables us to interpret and respond to the things that we experience. And of course, as everybody knows, in the alcoholic process, all of those things are out of whack, completely out of whack, and there's a reason for it. It's easy to kind of want to try to label it, like I was talking about earlier, but that's the, I don't know, I think it's hopeful to understand the science behind it. And like I say, it's not about letting the alcoholic off the hook. We got to, if we had leukemia, we got to take responsibility for it if we want to live. If we've got asthma, we got to take responsibility for it if we want to live. So very simply, let me skip past this one because there's a little bit easier one to understand. I think it's coming up, but this is just kind of talk about the neurons and the neurotransmitters and all that stuff. So obviously there's a lot going on in the brain that is easily disrupted with drinking and using. Well, anything. I mean, nicotine can do the same thing. Caffeine can do the same thing. Heroin and marijuana, our bodies actually have natural receptors for heroin and marijuana, or cannabinoid, opioid and cannabinoid, which mimics these natural transmitters in the body. I think, a lot of people say, well, you can't really get addicted to marijuana. There's no withdrawals for marijuana. That's just simply not true. A lifelong, it may not be withdrawals like alcohol or opioids, but a lifetime of smoking marijuana is going to leave you with all kinds of irritability, restlessness, anxiety, the cognitive distortions. And so that too needs to be dealt with just like every other aspect of addiction. So these are all out of whack, and it allows the drugs to attach onto and activate the neurons in the natural way in heroin and marijuana, although they don't activate them in the same way as a natural transmitter. So now they're receiving abnormal messages. I think that's very critical. Now up here, there's only a couple listed, but really it's all drugs, right? Drugs such as amphetamines, cocaine, alcohol, K2, just say all drugs. Causes these neurons to release abnormally large amounts of these neurotransmitters and prevents the normal recycling of these chemicals, and you're in trouble. And it doesn't take long for that to begin. It simply progresses through the addiction process. So that's why, and everyone's heard the term, it is progressive. This disease is progressive. It's never going to get better on its own. It will always get worse. While we're in here learning about change, your disease is out there in the parking lot doing push-ups. It is getting stronger. So we have to take these things extremely seriously if we want to live. These drugs alter important brain areas that are necessary for life-sustaining functions. And now here's the kicker of this one. Can drive compulsive drug use that marks addiction. And so that's all. Thank you, guys. Come on in. You're good. Let's get to the next one. I'm trying to hurry to the adolescents. Okay, so these are all the things that break down. Motivation, pleasurable effects, healthy activities like eating, socializing, sex, all of these obviously get disrupted and distorted. And these areas are part of where this gets stuck in the brain, the conditioning gets stuck in this reward circuit. And so drugs activate this circuit. What used to be, there's a term in early recovery, referred to as anhedonia, where, the brain is so messed up that now, and so distorted, that in early recovery, the person can no longer enjoy what should be, say, an enjoyable experience. Sitting, going out to lunch with your family is an enjoyable experience. Working really hard all day and then plopping in front of the TV for an hour and eating some ice cream is an enjoyable experience. Well, with the alcoholic addict, everything is so slowed down, it's so diminished, it's so bland, and because all of this stuff, this instant reward relief has been stored in the memory, this reward circuit, it increases their level of craving. I don't, that's why we always say in recovery, you just got to push through. You just got to push through. You just got to push through. Yeah, just sit anywhere. Just push through. It's okay that you feel like crap today. Just keep pushing through. Because it does change. Okay, so this is the part of the brain that plays a role in stressful feelings like anxiety, irritability, unease, which characterize the withdrawal, the withdrawal phase after the drug fades. Then motivating the user to want to use again, to need to use again. Dr. Macaulay talks about this in Pleasure Unwoven. It's literally the alcoholic is literally focused on the next 15 seconds. Right? It is literally life or death. I must use so that I don't feel bad. The whole partying thing, it's just fun, it helps me be more social, that's been gone a long time. By the time we've progressed into full-blown alcoholism and addiction, it is literally about survival. And so over time, this last paragraph, over time a person uses the drugs to get temporary relief from the discomfort rather than to get high or drunk. That's the conditioning. Now, the prefrontal cortex is also the last part of the brain to develop. So remember, earlier we were talking about it takes 25 years, thereabouts, for the brain to fully develop. And the part that develops last is the part of the brain where we're able to think, plan, solve problems, make decisions, exert self-control over impulses. That's where we learn how to delay gratification. We are able to make right choices, at least most of the time, and instead of emotional ones or impulsive ones. Well, that's been completely jacked up through, remember, if we started using it about age 12, that's when the first disruption occurs. That's an average age, by the way. And I don't know, maybe the guys don't want to share that with their families, but that's okay. Just know the average age is about 12. And that they may not have used again for 10 more years, but it's an introduction into a developing brain. And so there's going to be some sort of disruption. It may or may not have an impact if the person never uses again, but eventually, of course, as alcoholics and addicts, we are going to use again. So the shifting, let me back up. The last part of the brain to mature, this is why adult addicts display the behaviors, problem-solving abilities, self-control deficiencies, poor decision-making, and impulses of an adolescent. Now, especially, of course, we talk about this kind of stuff all the time as a group, and that one's tough. That one's tough to hear, but it's just reality. It's just the science, and to me, I see it as something extremely helpful, because it takes, it takes the shame out of it. We look at this. Say a recovering alcoholic looks at this and says, "Wow, I do see that, my life is unmanageable, and I live on my impulses, and I have a high need for instant gratification, and every time I try to make a good decision, it always goes bad, and so I just must be a loser. But in reality, there's very specific things that have happened in the brain. And if we're willing to address it from that perspective and remove our self-image out of it, then we can begin to change. So there's this shifting between these three areas, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the basal ganglia, that make the addict seek the drug, the compulsivity, and then the loss of impulse control. So in early recovery, these same behaviors are exhibited towards mundane things, such as, waiting for mail. And I get that all the time. Oh man, I got to check the mail. 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 I mean, it can literally just freeze someone all day long until the mail gets checked. That's all they can think about. I got to check the mail. I got to check the mail. And because there's instant gratification in that. If I can just check the mail, I'll get the letter from my family, or I'll get that thing, or there'll be $20 in there waiting for me, or there'll be some sort of instant gratification. That's what we call addict behavior. Even though the person isn't using, it's the exact same behavior, because the same things are going on in the brain. And we can also induce that by just chugging energy drinks all day long, drinking 10 pots of coffee a day, smoking. It's addict behavior. It's just compulsive and impulsive. And of course, recovery is geared toward moving us through that. But in early recovery, and when I say early recovery, I'm talking about year one, this distortion in the brain is so programmed, it is so strong, that it takes time to rebuild it, to move through it. And that's why, I think I'm gonna do some outpatient counseling, and then we quit after 2 days. Or, I think I'm gonna go to rehab, and then we bolt after 3 weeks. Or, I just need to get a new apartment. Or, I just need to... That's what's happening. Even though the person may not be using, the same things are going on in the brain that are driving those decisions, that behavior. So here we are with compulsive and impulsive, and I think it's important to make this distinction. Compulsivity is just relating to an irresistible urge, and the impulsivity is following through with it, and that's where the alcoholic is stuck. It's compulsive. I need this, I need this, I need this, I want this, I want this, I want this. And then the impulsivity is I'm going to do it, get it, find it, leave it, no matter what. And then that's all they can think about. Okay, we can move past that. Okay, so here's kind of the breakdown. I won't put y'all to sleep yet, but the prefrontal cortex, the last part, literally the front part of the brain, and I think we've got a nurse or two in the room. It's the CEO of the brain. This is where we reason. This is where we evaluate things. This is where we make decisions. This is where we suppress urges. This is where all of we bring our consequences to bear. I sure would really like to go rock climbing today, but my boss is expecting me at work, so I need to go to work, even though I wish I could go rock climbing. The alcoholic brain is going to go rock climbing and probably drink and fall off the cliff while they're doing, the VTA is the reward circuit. I'll go a little bit quicker because these are all really critical. The nucleus accumbens is the pleasure center. The amygdala is where we process the memory. The midbrain stores the memory and everything associated with it. Okay, that's really critical to conditioning. The hippocampus moves the memory from the short term to the long term. And this is why, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about trauma. This also plays a huge role in PTSD. This is why we can have an experience today and something about it is associated with an old traumatic experience. And even though you can't make the connection, you feel similar. You can get very irritable, very upset, very angry, over the top, overreact. Well, that's what's happening because it's stored in that memory. And then the glutamate handles mood and behavior, perception of sensations like pain. Now think about that for a minute. We don't remember how painful it was the last time we totaled our car, had to sleep in a buddy's garage for 30 days, lost the job, lost the girl, and then the GABA facilitates communication among all the brain cells. Now that one in particular is what alcohol and benzodiazepines impact the most. So you talk about your brain not communicating in normal functioning ways with all the other parts of the brain. You have alcoholism. That's what it looks like, and you know, alcoholism or addiction, but in particular, and so it can take longer. You know, if someone's drug of choice was particularly alcohol, it can take a little bit longer, and a good rule of thumb is 18 to 24 months for the brain to heal. Of course, things get better a whole lot quicker than that, but there's still a lot of healing going on, and we'll get into the solution before this is over. Okay, so it all begins in adolescence. Adolescence is the most significant stage of the brain development. This is where sensation seeking is happening. We're motivated for social relations, very sensitive to social evaluations, right? What do people think? I gotta have the right kind of shoes, I gotta have the right clothes, or else I won't belong, I won't be a part of a group. Structural remodeling and neural reconfiguration of key brain systems. And then here's the kicker. Any disruption during this process is devastating. And that's kind of a no-brainer, right? I mean, if you've got this thing and it's not even 50% developed, and then we introduce disruptions to it, well, you can apply that to pretty much anything, not just the brain. A very significant period, and we talk about this a lot with the group, is in here around the age of 7 to 9. And what tends to happen in this period is solidified. You know, remember, I think didn't we do trauma last week? Yeah, so it doesn't take much to have a traumatic experience that then gets, it sticks, it gets stuck in the memory, don't know how to respond to it, you internalize it, you keep it to yourself, you minimize it, oh, it's fine, everything's going to be okay. And when, of course, when you're 7, you don't know how to discuss that or process that in any way. And so we can have all kinds of experiences we don't know what to do with and don't even realize how they've impacted us. Now, these are all characteristics, and what's interesting, these are characteristics of the teen brain. And yet, every adult alcoholic and addict exhibit these same characteristics. Governed by feelings, immature, prone to high-risk behavior. Well, drinking is high-risk behavior. Impulsive. We don't process information effectively. And we're more excited for rewards than consequences. In fact, you know, we've become masters at minimizing consequences. You know, we can even bring that idea to bear. You know, man, if I do this, and it's not even about drinking and using. It's like, well, you know, if I do this thing, or if I blow off work today, or if I make some poor decision, but I really want to do this other thing. I really want to do it, and everybody's going to be there, and I got to show up, or they're going to think I'm a wussy or whatever. but I'm probably gonna lose my job. No, it'll be all right. I know me and so, we're real tight and it'll be okay. Right? That's classic addict thinking. It'll work out just because I'm hoping it'll work out. And so these are dead on. These characteristics are dead on. Okay, I'm gonna come to this one. Okay, so again, this relates to brain activity during use. Okay, so the dopamine sends the signals of pleasure, and everybody produces dopamine. That's a good thing. So it sends the signals of pleasure. The VTA receives the signals, which makes the person feel happy, or in the later stages of alcoholism, just feels relief. I don't know. Happy is a word that any alcoholic would use to describe the later stages, but it's relief. It's, oh, I don't feel bad. And then that also travels to the nucleus accumbens and then the prefrontal cortex where decisions get made. The hippocampus records the memory of this event. I've lost my mouse. The amygdala creates the conditioned response, encouraging the person to repeat the behavior. And of course, drugs create the shortcut to reward by sending a flood of dopamine through the brain. And this is why, when we're as family members or friends or just people on the outside are like, why don't you see what you're doing to yourself? Why can't you quit? And of course, the addict alcoholic is like, yeah, I do, and I don't know how. There's very real things that are happening in the brain, and that's why we need help. We just need help. So through that whole process, all that functioning or dysfunctioning of the brain, it just wipes out everything that was intended to be normal. And of course, in recovery, we use this Einstein quote quite a bit. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting a different result. And that's that addict thinking. Hence the term addict behavior or addict thinking or stinking thinking. We'll do the same things over and over, but we convince ourselves that, well, no, this time will be different because I really hope it'll be different. What really has to happen is we have to be willing to learn how to do different. This one represents the good news. Most people can recover. In fact, I say everybody can recover. The big book, this is a quote out of the big book. The only people who cannot recover are those who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And even in early recovery, we bring a lot of denial to the table, but that's one of the elements of time. We need time. We need a long enough runway, and we can still go through an early recovery process with a lot of denial. Oh, I'll be fine. I feel better now. I just need to get back to work. I just need, it's funny because we're just talking about insanity, doing the same thing over and over, and yet that's exactly where the alcoholic brain goes to. Once we get past the initial crisis, of whatever our crash and burn was, we got fired, we had a car accident, we crashed and burned, we lost our home, whatever it was. But as soon as the alcoholic addict feels better, remember, the brain hasn't changed yet. We're not thinking any differently. As soon as we feel better, we go, oh man, I'm good. Gosh, I don't ever want to do that again. I'm gonna do everything right this time. And then of course we just repeat the same cycle. We can do good for a short period of time, and then we always crash and burn because we haven't learned how to do anything different yet. And so in this process, we need time to learn, time to slow down, time to heal, time for the brain to change. I always tell the group, every day you don't hop that gate and run off into the darkness, you are growing. Because if nothing else, you gave yourself another day to heal. You're getting closer. You're getting closer. You're getting closer. That's probably one of the things that led to that saying that we hear so much around AA, just one day at a time. So this sounds overwhelming. If we're really going to do this thing, what's required is a complete overhaul of our biology, our psychology, our sociology, our spirituality, and a complete restructuring of our thought processes. Wow, how in the world are we going to pull that off? Well, the good news is we don't have to figure out how. We just have to show up. We got to show up and be willing. And all of these things must happen. That daily routine is everything. We got to be willing to slow down mentally, physically. We've got to be willing to learn new ways of thinking and reasoning and problem solving. We've got to, like we were talking about last week, we've got to be willing to face old trauma with a new perspective. We look at old trauma, if we're even willing to identify some old emotional trauma, we look at it from this old perspective of, well, that was so-and-so's fault. They did it to me. Or we say, oh, that was so long ago that doesn't bother me anymore. Or, yeah, I know that was a big thing, but it's no big deal. I don't even think about it anymore. Well, we've got to look at old pain with a new perspective and quit looking at it from the old perspective. Develop consistency in everything. Consistency in our decision making. Consistency in the way we deal with people, the way we treat people. We've been talking about this in group lately, last few weeks. We can do all these things temporarily, right? We can be very kind and caring and loving and compassionate and empathetic. It doesn't mean we don't have those natural qualities. We do. But that's not what we show most of the time. We'll show it at particular times. But then we'll also turn around and we'll steal money when you're not watching. We'll grab your purse. We'll write hot checks. We'll cause you to have to, leave work early to come bail me out of jail. Or, we don't live a life of that yet, but we can. And so emotional maturity, the next one after consistency, is vital, obviously. I say all the time, I think the recovery process is about maybe 60% of just growing up, which maybe sounds a little harsh, but remember what's happening in the brain, in the adolescent brain. If we're stuck at 7 or 9 or 12, and those characteristics do fit, I could go back a couple of slides, but those are the characteristics that we exhibit as adults, then that's a good thing to be willing to grow up. I want to mature. We must. And so for whatever reason, we've disrupted that adolescent brain. It just didn't happen. We got to be willing to learn new coping skills. Exercise is awesome. A balance to life. And it's the same solution. Those are all nice little bullet points, but the reality is we just need to be willing to be in a process of recovery, and all that stuff works itself out. Just stay in the process of recovery. A family participation is extremely helpful, but it is not required. Not for the alcoholic. Families who participate in the recovery process grow closer and more whole. That, I'm sure there's been all kinds of studies on that. That's just from my 20-year observation. I recognize that. The families that, like you guys, that are participating, it's great that you can come, but of course that's not practical for everybody. It's not about coming on here on Thursday nights. Is being willing to deal with some of your own stuff and really pay attention to the things we talk about in family group, and just being involved in this process of change. Well, it stands to reason that, of course, it would bring us all together. But for whatever reason, not There are some families who are not, for whatever, and I get it. Some of them are just like, I'm done. We whatever. You've caused us too much. We're not going any further. Good luck to you. Or maybe they're just, maybe they're not even present. But that person can still recover if they're willing to work for it. I like this one. God designed the brain. God knows how to repair the brain. God is not codependent. He will not do for you what you should do for yourself, but he will take care of everything else. You're either working towards something or you're waiting. We talk about this all the time. That's one of our little sayings. And in early recovery, there can be a lot of waiting, right? We're waiting to be told what to do. We're waiting to feel better. We're waiting for things to just wake up tomorrow and things to be new. Well, that's just all part of that distorted brain. But if we'll stay in the process, we will get through it. Oh, wow, that's the last one. Okay, so, now I'm lost. Oh, here we go. Let me get back up. Okay, so what, we're right at about an hour. Oh, wow, we got through that quicker than I thought. Let me just put that one back on from the beginning. Okay, it was crazy weather today. I'm glad everybody made it. Here's the good news. You don't have to memorize all that stuff, but I think there's a lot of interesting things in that slideshow. What are some of the things that you guys think of as we go through this? It could be behavioral. Maybe some bells and whistles are going off. Talk about that for a minute.
I can see some of this so much in myself because I'm a compulsive eater, and I get those feelings from, like I ate a whole pan of brownies this weekend. It's
Wow.
It does stuff.
Wow.
It really, the eating, it's a compulsion, and
Yeah.
so I really, and I can, when you think about what chemicals can do, how much more intense it must be.
Right. Just recognizing that, is that something you've felt like you've struggled with for a while? Just that compulsivity?
Yeah, I used to be very heavy. I was a heavy teenager.
Wow.
It's been a lifelong battle with me.
Wow. Never knew.
I can myself. I can eat.
Yeah. So,
But
what?
it gives me that same feeling, and then you get that, it's like you're sick, you don't want to eat anymore, you don't feel good, you can't do anything now.
Yeah.
But you're going to go eat more because, that's the only thing that calms you.
Yes.
So it's this horrible
That's
vicious
that.
circle.
It's stored in the memory. That's that relief.
Yeah.
So, do you recognize that you do it? You do it more when you're feeling stress, or could be bored, restless.
It's pretty situational, just sometimes I'll just
Yeah.
do it, But, yeah, I mean, it's not something that happens as much anymore,
Yeah.
all the time anymore, but still, I can recognize when that comes on.
That's awesome. One of the suggestions I always give, because it comes out so much in just smoking, and then we get into this kind of environment, and the brain is dry, and we're confused, and we're minds are racing about all of our regret and things we wish we'd done different and things we're going to do different next, and we can just get ourselves very restless and discontent, and so our cigarette intake increases. Just smoke. We go have a cigarette, and then okay, well, maybe whatever. It's time for lunch, and then smoke again, and then I'm not. Oh, it's group's not going to start for another hour, so I'm going to go have another cigarette, and then another cigarette. It becomes this go-to behavior because we don't know what else to do, and so one of the things I always suggest is don't don't go so far as to try to deprive yourself of that cigarette. Let's do this one thing at a time right now. But start practicing replacing that impulse. So when you're going to go have a cigarette, hit the pause button, go do your chore, go make your bed, go read 2 minutes of some recovery-oriented book, read a chapter, whatever. Keep it very doable, and then go have your cigarette. And what happens is if you stay disciplined with it and you really commit to it, what happens is you start realizing that it is just an impulse, and you weren't really craving more tobacco in that moment, and you start building other behaviors, and then all of a sudden your 2 minutes of reading turns into 2 hours of reading, and then you wake up one day and you realize you haven't had a cigarette for 6 hours. It's all about replacing that behavior. But you're programming, or I should say reprogramming your brain. And so start with really simple, doable, achievable goals. Start with 30 seconds. Just grab the impulse. You're still going to get your cigarette. Don't worry. You're still going to get your cigarette. Just go take out the trash and then go have your cigarette. Go read the book. Go, whatever. And it's amazing because it does work, because that's all part of your reprogramming. I think, so all of us deal with some sort of compulsion, and sometimes it, may end up in something that delivers healthier results, but it's still driven by the same thing. It's still that need for relief. I got to get this thing done. I got to get this thing done. I got to get this thing done. And we can give up other things that are just as important. That's the whole point of compulsion. I'm not really reasoning. I'm just seeking relief, like now. Anybody else want to share anything? It's so funny. It's like a podcast. Like the Dr. Miles podcast, Thursday nights. Anyway, nobody ever watches this but you guys. But yeah, I know. I'm counting on you to set that up.
I got you covered.
Well, if nobody has anything to share, I'm glad we got. Everybody's here tonight. This is pretty awesome, and y'all made it safely. I'm glad. We were a little worried because it was storming really good here for a while.
Yeah, we saw it. Yeah, we saw the rain.
Oh, wow.
I was driving it, yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, thanks everybody watching on online, and we're going to end it, and we're going to close it out. And I appreciate you, Eric, for taking care of all that tonight.